So let me tell you why I think reticulated pythons are a better snake to keep than the Burmese python. Reticulated pythons, like that little cracker up there. Things have changed an awful lot since I started keeping snakes as a boy, when, to be honest, Burmese pythons were known as the puppy dog giant snake, and equally as available reticulated pythons were known as nasty, cantankerous, bitey creatures that looked stunning, especially that iridescence in the sunlight, but yeah, not very nice to keep. That's how they portrayed. That's pretty much how things were, and I'm going to tell you how things were, but how things are now. Things have changed, and I think for sure, for an interesting pet, an easier to keep pet, more beautiful pet maybe, the reticulated python now trumps the Burmese python. Things have changed a lot. What are the two biggest changes when it comes to reticulated pythons? Because to be honest, not a great deal has changed with a Burmese python. It still is a puppy dog python that grows huge and makes a fairly good giant snake. So what makes things different? Why is this little creature a better bet than a Burmese python? Look at that. Well, number one thing, of course, is the reticulated pythons aren't the same. They're not wild take. They were wild caught animals when I started keeping them. They'd been through a lot of stress. They'd been handled badly by people probably collecting them that were scared of them. They'd come to know humans absolutely as dangerous and horrible things that probably want to eat them and hurt them. And they were frightened. As they say, there is no bad snake, but there are defensive snakes. And a snake that's frightened and been handled roughly, certainly even when it's young, it's going to retaliate by being defensive. And reticulated pythons are highly active, quite high metabolism pythons. And to be honest, as snakes go, they do seem to have a little bit of intelligence about them, and certainly have got a memory. So these guys were very, very bitey, very unpredictable, very untrustworthy. You could handle them one day and things seemed okay. Another day, they seemed to want to absolutely kill you. And their long teeth and long reach made them potentially quite a painful snake to work with. Whereas the Burmese pythons, on the whole, even if they were a little bit bitey to start with, soon settled down, as they do now. Of course, both species now, you don't need anything captive, wild caught. You can work with both captive bred. The Burmese pythons are as good as they've always been. The big difference is captive bred Retics, now over generations and generations for different colour morphs, so that they've been line bred for a long time. They're nothing like those wild caught snakes I remember, like those wild caught snakes that I refer to. In fact, reticulated pythons are wonderful captive animals, wonderful pets. Mine just do not bite. I've only got 3 nowadays, 3. They're all captive bred and they're worlds apart from every reticulated python I kept when I was younger. All those wild caught animals. These are not only seemingly intelligent, they're very, very calm animals, but they've still got that reputation. So why, all these years of captive breeding later, when they really are a nice animal to work? Certainly, you know, if you're going to pick a snake up, you've got to be confident and you've got to let it understand that you're not food or a threat to it. I've just recently rehomed a false water cobra off someone. It's less than half the length it should be if it had been fed correctly. The guy's a great guy. He's been keeping boas and didn't really realise the high energy needs of a false water cobra. And this snake, I reached it and picked it up. It just started trying to eat my hand. Oh, it's biting, it's aggressive. It was trying to eat me, not be aggressive. It didn't know that the smell of us was not part of its food. We're organic. It just thought, oh, it's food coming in, I'll eat it. It just never been handled enough to learn that. Reticulated pythons, any snake, a king snake, anything, might nibble on you as a baby. It might bite you defensively as a baby. But these reticulated pythons nowadays, they're very, very different animals. So why do they still have a bit of a reputation for being a bit like that when they're generally not? It's because of their super high feeding response, just like those colubrids, the false water cobras I've just spoke about. They do never want to miss a trick. They're the best snake for feeding. You won't have trouble with your retic not feeding like a royal python. Their feeding response is do or die. I get one chance as this thing goes by. I'm going to launch my full length at it and grab it. They're a long, slender python. They've got a good long reach and it's fast. Terrifies people. You open their vivarium, your chick might lunge forward, come right out half its body length, third of its body length, come flying out the viv. It's not trying to attack you. It's not even being viv defensive. It's trying to nail that thing that's moving outside because it thinks food's coming in and it doesn't want to miss its chance. Let's have a look at that right now. So being a python, it's not just got visual stimuli, that sense of smell and taste wrapped up in its tongue. It's got those amazing heat pits. So your hand or arm waving about can get its attention pretty well indeed. She's actually behaving. Even with a bit of luring. Maybe not. How fun is that when you want them to launch out and do their scary move? They don't. So when you've got a girl like this, or a boy like this, she's a girl, she's settled down in her enclosure. They do love a shelf, reticulated pythons. It really increases the space in your enclosure as well. Give them a shelf, they love it. They've got their enclosure, they're settled down. You open the door very often, in fact, typically not today. They'll launch out and that snake will get to sort of, where are we now? You're talking, yeah, 2 or 3 feet if it really feels keen and hungry, launching very, very fast from a standstill. It's not being aggressive, it's not being viv defensive like my blue beauty snakes. It is literally trying to get food. Once you understand that, things are very, very different because you can manage your snake quite easily. If I reach in now with this angle, with the way she's sort of sitting there, there's a good chance I'll get bitten. It's not aggressive, not like those old pythons I used to work with, those wild caught retics, which would be nervous of you. They wouldn't even be sitting still like this. They might well try and get away, but as soon as you got your hands on them, they would bite you. They would even go for your face when you're handling them. Very unpredictably, they were frightened of you, trying to bite you, so you let them go and they could escape. Very different here. So how can we get this snake out without getting bitten? Well, we could use a snake hook to just tap it on its nose. And I don't mean hit it, I mean literally touch it on its nose so it understands, oh, okay, there's no food. We'll just touch it on its body. You could use the Brian Barscheck method, or many of his contemporaries, a rolled up kitchen roll, or you could, in my case, I have a small green indoor plant watering can, which is usually empty, which I use to just touch her on the nose. It's full of water today, so here we go. Once you've got that snake backing off and it realises you're not food, it's just going to go into its, oh, okay, well, I don't want to come out, I'm going to run off then mode. You've told it it's not feed time. You've told it there's no food coming in. And here she is. Hold on, you guys. And there she goes. So one-handed isn't working, but you can kind of see she's now just thinking, oh, bugger this, I'm out of here. I don't want to come out to play. So very, very different. Absolutely friendly. I'm holding her quite tightly now. There's no aggression there whatsoever. You've got this beautiful, beautiful snake. Look at her pushing off. Beautiful, silky smooth animal. No feed response because we touched her with that object. It told her, oh, blimey, there's no forceps full of food coming in. There's no squirrels or rats or small rabbits coming in today. We've got to come out and go to school. And she's thinking, yeah, that doesn't sound like fun. I'll just go back in. But a completely different animal. It's not scared. It's using its brain and it's just thinking, yeah, I don't want to come out and be played around with. So different from those other animals. Remember the Burmese pythons? They're kind of the same. They're still chilled out animals as pythons go. But what I'm trying to tell you is how different reticulated pythons are. If you're still working on the old myth that is now a myth, that they're bitey, untrustworthy, horrible big snakes to work with. These guys are truly gorgeous. So that's one reason they're different, and I'll tell you why they've changed in a completely different way. This beautiful golden albino golden child is 50% super dwarf. So dwarf and super dwarf reticulated pythons is something you're going to hear spoken about. Just like many things, it can be lied about. If you are working with a genuine breeder or someone you trust, then the big difference is you can have a big python without it being a stupidly sized python. It might sound cool to the chosen few who generally want a giant snake, but realistically, they're going to need enclosures bordering on the size of a small room in your house. Whereas this 50% super dwarf, you're downsizing your giant snake. She's about 9 to 10 feet long now, and yet she sits comfortably in a 5 foot, be 3 foot high by 2 foot enclosure with a shelf. It's very, very different. It's a big snake. She's still going to get to about 12 feet, but she's not going to do, I don't know, 20 feet. And fed properly, she's not going to become a big, hideous, fat, bloated pig either. She's going to keep her athletic build and her athletic good looks too. Well fed, reasonably well muscled up. She just climb around, but not a big fat bloater that's going to eat a small piglet every month and take up a stupid amount of room. Reticulated pythons now offer you, if you wish, a smaller giant python. Much more variety. Of course, if you like colour morphs, I actually don't. My friend gave me her a while back. I think she's beautiful, but not as beautiful as a natural coloured one. But if you do like coloured morphs, reticulated pythons come in so many colour morphs, but they also come in not only dwarfs, super dwarfs, 50% crosses and so on, making your big python smaller. They do indeed come in locality dwarfs, purebred, like this one up here, where you can specialise or just keep pure locality morphs. Some of these are super dwarfs and some are dwarfs. This is a Kayuadi purebred animal. There's 2 of them in here. They're not going to grow even as big as her. These are in their natural colours, my favourite. Take them out in sunlight after they've shed their skin. Wow, your rainbow boas have got something to sort of compete with there for beauty. But look, there's 2 in there. They get on just fine. I wouldn't keep 2 males together, certainly at maturity. But in here is a 5 foot, be 4 foot tall, be 2 foot wide enclosure, naturalistically planted out. It looks okay. They've got loads of places to hide. They're not big fat bloaters laying on the vivarium floor like a big fat 15, 18 foot Burmese python. You've got something that will spend time arboreally, because these super dwarfs stay lean if you don't overfeed them. They stay much smaller, like a young mainland retic or a young Burmese python. They use their arboreal tendencies much more even when they're mature, because they stay small enough to make it happen. Feeding on the walls inside caves. Oops, there goes a plant. Or up in the trees. So you've got an animal as a keeper that's now much more versatile, because you can not only keep it in a smaller space than a giant mainland retic or a Burmese, you can actually keep it in an enclosure that looks nice in your room and that you can enjoy them crawling around and climbing around in. So let's see what happens. Always I just go in and touch that animal, not front on, and away we go. Ha ha ha. Look at that. He was snoozing so soundly there. Look at this lovely, lithe, beautiful animal, and a face that looks like it can actually do a little bit of thinking and certainly recognise you. Let's turn the camera around, because this guy's going to just keep trying to get away back into its house. So here we are, the perfect giant snake. A giant snake that's absolutely chilled, placid. You could let children work with this snake. It actually does go to schools. Nothing like those old reticulated pythons. And although, hold on, this one is actually longer than you'd ever think, sitting curled up asleep. Wow, you've got a snake that, whilst only a youngster, isn't going to grow into a giant python. It's going to grow into a python that's big enough to impress anyone, and yet not so big you can't keep it in a beautiful enclosure with plenty of room to do stuff, and not so big it's going to in any way threaten you handling it on its own, because this guy here is a manageable size giant snake, a true dwarf python. And some of the other locality dwarfs are super dwarfs, and they generally don't get more than a few feet long. And with their lovely, almost colubrid-like svelteness. Look at that. You've got a snake that is just wonderful. There's a finger. Wonderful to work with. You're going back in. So I keep a lot of my snakes communally. Fascinating behaviours that you just don't see with a snake kept in a box on its own. Lots of thought. There's videos on the channel about that. Lots of things to think about, but actually cohabiting them makes for much more interesting animals in many, many cases. It doesn't work for everything, but so far it's working exceedingly well with this pair of Coyote dwarf retics in an enclosure that doesn't look half bad. Living plants that are still living, just about. Lots of places to climb. Wonderful to see them, whether they're basking or before you disturb them, or actively out at night in a reptile room, and yet still pets that I can get out and handle and even take to schools as part of my educational program. So if you love Burmese pythons, so do I. This video was never to slate Burmese pythons or say you should have retics and not Burmese pythons. Don't be so silly. This video really is to showcase how amazing reticulated pythons are, especially for people maybe old like me that had them when they were younger and have always put them down to, there's plenty of other snakes. I don't need something that dangerously aggressive and bitey, no matter how beautiful it is. They're not those snakes anymore. A snake that is absolutely pettable, absolutely as trustworthy as any good snake ever is, feeds all the time, every time. In fact, as much enjoyment as there is in feeding such a greedy snake, you really do have to make sure you don't overfeed them. A snake you can set up in a beautiful enclosure or keep in a rack system if that's your thing. They don't really seem to care. They just look nicer in a nicer looking enclosure. And a snake that has more choice than a Burmese python nowadays in so many ways, including genuine super dwarf to 50% dwarf to full-size mainland giants. Reticulated pythons, I rediscovered them only a couple of years ago, and I'm so glad I did. I never thought I'd keep reticulated pythons again or have any wish to. Here we are. I'm now looking forward to 2 or 3 years down the road actually breeding reticulated pythons. I hope you enjoy them. Definitely food for thought, whether you're in the UK, Europe, the States or wherever. But for sure, where I am in the UK, they're probably not as big as well known as they are in the United States. Check out Reach Out Reptiles channel. He'll tell you everything you need to know about super dwarf reticulated pythons. But do your research before getting one. Really think long and hard before getting any snake that is going to grow giant. Really does have some drawbacks. And no, you can't just give it to the zoo when it's too big. That window's shut down many, many years ago. Don't get any animals unless you're really thinking about keeping them for the rest of their lives for sure. Hope you enjoy the channel. See you soon.